The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
I heard from the Tolner Rebbe, Shlita, Rav Weinberg. He had a Zayde, the old Tolner Rebbe. He lived in Bayit Vegan, Yerushalayim. And it was 11 o'clock at night, and a boy came into him from yeshiva. And the boy says he needs a place to sleep. The old Tolner Rebbe was known, people would come to his house from everywhere. He needs a place to sleep. So he says, what happened? He says, the mashgiach of the yeshiva caught him doing something wrong, and he threw him out, and he said, you can't even sleep tonight at the yeshiva. You have to leave. Go home. So I don't have a place to sleep because he doesn't let me be in the dormitory. So the old Tolner Rebbe was an Alta Yid in his 80s. He says, come, let me against the mashgiach. We're going to visit the mashgiach. So they go to the mashgiach's house, the supervisor of the yeshiva, and he knocks on the door. It's already 11:30 at night. It's close to midnight. And the man comes out in pajamas. And the Tolner Rebbe doesn't want the bacha to be there because either he's put him outside, he kept him in his house. I don't know exactly. And what happened was he turns to Mashiach and he says, I have a question. You threw out this and this boy from the yeshiva? He says, yeah. He says, Rebbe, you know what happened? I'll tell you what. And he tells him a story. Wasn't a nice thing. He says, Versteh, I understand. He says, and where did you expect him to sleep tonight? He says, it's not my problem. He's out of yeshiva. He says, 1 second. When does the last bus leave Bayit Vegan to be able to go to other neighborhoods? Do you know? He says, 8:30. So he says, you throw him out later. Where's he supposed to sleep tonight? Boy needs a bed. He says, it's not my asik. It was too dangerous to keep him in the dormitory because of his spiritual situation. So he says, Echer, and you went into pajamas tonight. He says, yeah. And you're about to go to sleep. He says, yeah. So he says, to explain this to me, you threw a boy out of his bed tonight, and you could still put on pajamas and go to sleep. How does that work? You don't want him in the dormitory? Get out and walk around with him the whole night. Go walk around, Bayit Vegan. Take him on a walk through the park. Stay up with him. He doesn't belong in the dormitory. You get into pajamas? I don't understand you. I don't understand you. The Mashgiach, to his credit, said, you're right. I have to do tshuva. And he apologized. The Tolner Rebbe said when his Zayde died, this man came to the Mashgiach, came to the Shiva, and to his credit, he told over the whole story about himself. He told the story about himself. They tell a story about one of the great Hasidic masters, that he was seeing people. And when people would come in, come out, so after each few people, he called in his assistant, and he took off his frak, his kapota, and it was soaking wet. And he asked him to bring him a change of clothes. And finally, at some point, this man says, "Was schwitzt ihr also? Why are you sweating so much? Well, what have you been doing? You're not working out. You're sitting in your office meeting people." And he responded to him, and he said something very powerful. He said, in the past few hours, dozens of people came to see me. Each of them poured out his soul and asked for my assistance. In order for me to be able to understand what these people were saying, I had to take off my clothes and put on their clothes. Because if I would be sitting in my clothes, I couldn't even understand what they're talking about. So I had to put on their clothes in order to listen to them. When they finish speaking, I now have to respond. But if I'm wearing their clothes, I can't respond because they're the ones who came with the problem, and I also have that problem. So I have to take off their clothes and put on my clothes and respond from my perspective to be able to guide them. But then they have another question. So I have to, again, take off my clothes and put on their clothes. And then when I want to answer, I have to be able to see it from a larger perspective, so I have to put on my clothes. And so in the last hour, I have changed my clothes hundreds of times. If you would be changing your clothes on and off hundreds of times, they would also be sweating. And if this is true with spiritual clothes, Do you know how much more difficult it is with psychological clothes, emotional clothes, spiritual clothes? That's why I'm sweating. There was the famous tzaddik of Yerushalayim. You've heard of him, Rabbi Aryeh Levin. You heard of Rabbi Aryeh Levin. He was an extraordinary figure. He passed away in 1969. He was known as the tzaddik of Jerusalem, and he would visit all the prisoners under the British mandate. In the 40s, he was known, and for years, till his death, in the 50s and 60s, he would go to prisons and visit Jewish prisoners. He was a very warm Jew. And Rabbi Aryeh Levin was once walking on the street in Jerusalem, and he had a former student who completely abandoned the Jewish way of life. Rabbi Aryeh Levin was a tall man in spirit, but a very short man in height. So you could see him walking in the streets of Yerushalayim, and he would walk fast, and he had a student who completely left Yiddishkeit. So he saw his old Rabbi coming against him, and he felt awkward. He liked him, but he felt awkward, because of the way he looked. So he decided to cross the street. You ever do that when there was still enough space, so you don't have to get into a conversation. Rabbi Aryeh saw that, so he went after him, and he caught up to him, and he says, "Shalom Aleichem, I'm so happy to see you, but I saw that you avoided me. Please be honest with me." You can be honest with me. Why would you want to avoid me? So he says, "I'll be perfectly honest. I'm very embarrassed to see you because I don't have a yarmulke on my head. And I didn't want to bump into you without a yarmulke, so that's why I did it. Anyway, here I am anyway without a yarmulke because you bumped into me. But I was trying to avoid the awkwardness." And he looked at him and he said, "My dear student, don't you realize I am a very short man? I can only see up to your heart. That's all I can see." And that student shared that. It not only left an impact on him, it transformed him. Rabbi Aryeh Levin was a very, very big Yirei Shamayim. He was known as the tzaddik of Yerushalayim. He cared about a yarmulke. But he wanted to see the person, and he let the person know that he's seeing him. He said, "I'm a short man. I only see up to people's hearts. I don't see anymore. Sorry. For this, I have to be able to peer deeply into a person, appreciate the individual, appreciate their experiences, their backgrounds, where they are today, where they're coming from, what they have been through, what their fears are, what their struggles are. They may be making wrong decisions. These symptoms of leprosy are not good symptoms. The Torah is not saying they're good. But the Torah is saying before you deem this person impure, you have to understand who the person is and make sure this is what's going to rehabilitate and heal the person from this state.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org